Should I go ahead and get started?
Yes, ma'am. It's all you.
Okay, fantastic. So I just want to introduce myself to everybody. My name is Molly Goforth. I play the cello, and I am a private cello instructor, and I also teach cello at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. I'm the cello professor there. When I first moved to Louisiana, I spent about 5 or 6 years teaching classroom strings, so high school string orchestra, and working in a classroom setting there, starting beginners all the way up to more advanced players. So I have a pretty diverse background in string education and teaching cello. And one of the things that I've kind of become obsessed with over the years is how to get students to practice well, because practicing well is something that is difficult to teach because we don't see them practice usually. We send them off to practice and we don't know exactly what happens. And then also in the classroom and in the lesson, getting them to perform a correct repetition enough times for it to stick when they go off to practice. And so that's basically what this presentation is all about. So let me get this slideshow started. So the title of the presentation is Do It Again, and it's techniques and games for repetitions. I've tried to make them general, so they're not for strings specifically, and also not for necessarily a large classroom, nor for one person or an individual lesson. They're designed to be very flexible. So first, I wanted to kind of define what makes a mindful repetition, because we've all been ourselves in situations and seen students in situations where they play things over and over again, and they're either incorrect or they're kind of zoned out and playing it. And that's not what we're going for. So I have this quote from Bach up here: "What I have achieved by industry and practice, anybody else with tolerable natural gift and ability can also achieve," which is kind of a funny thing to think about, that anybody who has a natural gift and ability would be able to do something like what Bach does. So as I said before, we all know that through personal experience that musical ability is acquired through practicing. And there is more and more research now about what happens when musicians practice. There's blog posts, you can Google it, you can find it pretty easily online. And some of it is scientific and some of it is not. And there's a lot of resources out there for that. And in all of the kind of chaos of research that there is, one thing that I kind of hold on to is the idea that ability is developed by the repeated firing of neurons. And as these neurons fire in the brain, the path that they take is coded by a substance called myelin, which that coding is known as myelination. And the more activity is repeated mindfully, the more myelin a student or a person will acquire, and the easier that activity will be. And this process is described pretty clearly in a book called The Talent Code, written by Daniel Coyle. And he talks about the kinds of things that you can do to create myelin and the kinds of things that don't really work. And one of the things he discusses is that mindless repetitions do not really help at all when practicing. They do not cause myelination. So all of these games are designed to refocus, avoid any sort of habituation that might lead to mindless practice, and get us all having some great ideas for our personal practice and for the classroom to do things many, many times in a row to achieve mastery. One of the things that is difficult to get students to do because they just want to play is to get them to think. Think 10 times and play once. So I thought this was a really great diagram of the thought processes that go on in the practice room. So obviously, before you start, you need to know what you're going to play. So deciding what to play. And then the thing I think many people do not do is knowing how they want it to sound before they start to play. I think a lot of students especially just play something and then the sound comes out and then they evaluate their result. But if you have an idea of what you want it to be before you actually start, that is going to save a lot of time in the practice room. So emphasizing what are you looking for when you're playing a particular passage. And this is true too for an ensemble as well. Kind of getting the ensemble to think, what as an ensemble are we trying to do? How does my part fit into the whole? And then playing it. And then evaluating the result. And I think the only downside to this particular diagram is if you did get the result you wanted, you definitely need to repeat at least several times until it becomes a more automatic process. So the question is, how do we get students to A, want to repeat, and B, think about it when they do? This next chart, before we get into the actual activities, is interesting because it basically is dividing it. They did a study. Lisa Maynard did a study in the bulletin of the Council for Research in Music Education. And what she did is she found undergrad students who are just beginning their undergrad career, advanced undergrad students, which would be juniors and seniors, graduate students, and teachers at the university. And they tried to figure out, they videoed their practice sessions, and they tried to figure out how many times did they repeat something, how long was the section that they were repeating, how long did they practice overall, and then they crunched some numbers and found out how many times, how many repetitions they would get in a certain amount of time. So, for example, if you look at the guitar tab here, you can see that the teacher practiced for 63 minutes. AT is the abbreviation for teacher. The practice frames is what they practiced. So they practiced 36 different items in the 63 minutes. Their average time that they spent practicing any one thing was 1 minute and 45 seconds. And the teacher performed 421 different trials of the things that they were practicing. So their average was 11 tries of each item that they were practicing. And then you can compare it down. The graduate student practiced for 87 minutes. The advanced undergraduate practiced for 74 minutes. And then the undergrad student only practiced for 19 minutes. And the interesting thing as you look down through all of these charts is that most of the time what these people are practicing lasts for less than 2 minutes. So when they're practicing a particular passage, they're only practicing it for about 2 minutes. And each piece that they're practicing only lasts about 6 seconds. So that would be the equivalent of maybe a measure or 2 measures, not a whole song. And I think a lot of students, when we are in the classroom, we're used to practicing big chunks of music in an ensemble. We're not just playing one measure over and over again until it sounds exactly perfect most of the time. And students sometimes don't realize that they need to do that on their own if they're having a technical problem. This is one of my favorite quotes. 10 dubious repetitions plus a single accurate one does not equal security. So a few points from the introduction that I just gave. Most people do repeat things when they practice, but often they're not planning those repetitions. They're not repeating enough. Our students don't know to repeat enough times for it to be secure. In the classroom, because we're dealing often with ensembles, we don't teach students how to do repetitions. And we use repetitions ourselves in a larger context, not necessarily one measure at a time. It's important that we teach students how to use a feedback loop effectively. And it's important for us to give activities for students to do at home that are not just completing a exercise in the book, but how to complete that exercise in the book. What are some techniques for being mindful about what you're actually doing when you're practicing? Okay, so how do we motivate our students to actually go home and do the hard work of repeating one or two notes or one or two measures over and over again? So Carol Dweck is a great child psychologist, and her work is focusing on how students and how individuals change over time in what they think about and what they think about in terms of their own abilities. She says, pay attention to what your children are fascinated by and praise them for their effort. So how does this relate to practicing? When a student expresses an interest in a particular TV show or a particular type of music, or you can see that they're extremely active and like to move around the room a lot. These next games that I'm going to show you kind of harness those interests and help them loop that into what they're going to do when they go home, and can help you loop into what you do in the classroom. So that kind of falls under the children's lead. The other thing is students generally are curious. So if you show them something that is really new, that they've never heard before or seen before, they are going to pay attention. If you do something that you've never done before, they're going to suddenly pay attention. If somebody new comes in the room, they're going to pay attention. So harnessing that. Spontaneous play, even for older students, can be a great source of motivation for them. Just sitting down and trying, for example, all the different ways to play a particular note, short, long, different tone colors, anything like that, just to get them thinking about new ways of playing and doing things. Social learning, so doing things in small groups and leadership opportunities there. Of course, we all provide challenges. Allowing even a small choice of what to do first versus second. Helping students kind of plan their to-do lists per se, and allowing them to make their own kind of practice charts. Not using incentives as much as possible. And then also, this is one that is near and dear to my heart, making sure that the process of practicing is more important than the result, the performance of it. Because if the seating audition is more important than all of the practice that came up before the seating audition, and the student doesn't get the result they want, they will be, of course, very upset. But if you point out how much they improved as they practiced for the seating audition, and that is the goal. That's why we have seating auditions anyway, really, is to make the students practice. If their improvement over that time is the emphasis, then they won't be as discouraged if they don't get the result they want. And then finally, empathy. And of course, during these times, that's especially important. Even the most dedicated student is not necessarily going to be putting in their best work every single day. All right, so here we go. This is the reason everybody came to this presentation. The ideas for encouraging mindful repetition. So as I was developing these games and as I used these games, here's a few quick things that I kept in mind. Most importantly, the games should allow for time for thinking before and after the repetitions. The action should be fairly short. As you saw in the chart earlier, most of the people practiced each section for 2 minutes or less. And also, again, the game should be fairly short. And you want to pick something that is going to excite the student, not something that they're not interested in at all. So the way these are organized, these games are based on things that I've observed and used over the years that I've been teaching, and things that have been used on myself as well by other teachers. And they are collected and modified. The games that I know other people have originated specifically, I've credited them in the game. And I have organized these games into 4 categories. Games that really focus just on sound, games that focus on physical feeling or moving, games that are just purely imaginative, and games that use social learning or need somebody else in their environment to complete. And within each kind of category there, I've shown examples of how it can be used with the different teaching points. So posture, intonation, rhythm or articulation, tone, and phrasing and dynamics. So the games that are based on sound. So if you're trying to work on posture, it's a little bit difficult to have a game that only involves sound. But one of the things that I've found very effective, I'm calling sound of your seat. So as a student is sitting with their best posture, have them play and listen to the sound in the room. Then have them try playing in a variety of other positions, maybe sitting with poor posture, standing, and seeing how that sounds. You can carry this game further by having students take turns playing a phrase or a series of notes and see if everybody can tell when they lose their posture with their eyes closed. So the other students would have their eyes closed, the person playing would change their posture and see how that affects the sound and if the other students can tell. The second one uses a sound to alert students when they have poor posture. So basically the way that would work is you would show them what the alarm is going to sound like. So you can either demonstrate on your own instrument, or if you have a speaker, you can put an alarm on your phone, and you would play that alarm when students are starting to have a bad posture. And the goal is for them to make it all the way through the passage that you're trying to work on without losing their posture. And of course, some students might find it hilarious that you're having to put an alarm on. And for these students, after it's gone on for enough time and you're annoyed by that, you can tell them that their prize for not having the alarm go off is that they can either take turns or individually make the alarm go off. Either show them on their instrument, or if you're using a recorded alarm, let them press the button for that. Intonation. This basically is very dependent upon sound and listening. So this one is a little bit more intuitive. So one idea is identifying certain ringing tones. So every instrument has tones that have more harmonics, have a more ringing sound, and those are the ones that I would start with. So for stringed instruments, Ds, Gs, As, and playing those and listening and counting how many seconds those sounds last in the room once they've been played. And surprisingly, students get very into this. Even older students, high school students, they get pretty competitive to see whose sound can last the longest. And you can point out that pitches that are out of tune don't last as long. You can do this with chords as well to see how long the sound of the chord rings once you cut it off, and listening to the pitch in the chords. Hits and misses was one that I learned from Mr. Paul York. He's a cellist up in Kentucky. And he makes the point that if you can play sharp or flat to the note, then you can find the center of the note. And so listening to what does it sound like when it's sharp, what does it sound like when it's flat, what does it sound like when it's just right. And finally, this one is a really interesting one for tuning chords and intervals. So you'll have two students playing, and as they go sharp and flat, you'll have the other students in the room use their hand to demonstrate the beats of the pitches. So pure intervals, such as octaves, fifths, unisons, there will be no beats. The hand will be still. But as it goes out of tune, you're going to really hear the sound waves crashing together. For rhythm and articulation, mixing and matching two different rhythms. So having them, if they're constantly messing up on a rhythm, having them play or yourself demonstrating the correct rhythm and then the incorrect rhythm, and have them verbalize the difference, have them identify which is which, have them take turns and have a guessing game. I find this particularly effective if students are reversing rhythms, trying to get them to articulate the difference between the two rhythms, and then perform both rhythms so that they understand the difference between the two. For articulation, a similar idea where you can have two contrasting articulations and have students identify which one is which. Attempt the sound on the instrument, and then name the songs that they know are fit within those articulations. So I use the example of bumpy versus smooth, which is good for elementary students. You can use the word pointed. You can use the Italian staccato versus legato. You can make this more advanced by having the passage be an entire phrase and trying to listen through the articulation for the whole phrase and then changing up that articulation. Similarly, one thing that is difficult for some students in strings to hear at the more advanced level is the difference between a lifted articulation or a martelé, hammered articulation. And so using the same process to identify which is which and when they happen, when they're supposed to happen. For tone, this one is, hearing the room is a great one, I think, for anybody, especially if you're playing alone. And the idea is that as you sit in your spot, you're going to try and put your ears in different parts of the room. So if I'm playing my cello, can I hear the sound reverberating off of the far corner? Can I hear kind of up to the ceiling? How does the cello sound in the room, not just like right in front of me? Also playing in different parts of the room. And what does it sound like if I am playing in the corner? What does it sound like if I'm playing outside? And the sound changes quite a bit in the different parts of the room, and it also prepares students for playing in different performance spaces. And of course, if you have a passage that needs to be played quite a bit, if you tell students to go play that passage in a different room of their house every night, then they're going to get several repetitions of that passage. The other thing is verbally describing different kinds of tone colors, giving students the opportunity to think about how many kinds of tone colors they could get on a particular passage, and then try each one. See if they can come up with slight variations of each one. See if they can play a passage all the way through using just one tone color. See if they can play a completely different example from what you're working on in the same tone color as what you're trying to achieve in the main passage. So all that will help them practice just the sound that they're getting in a variety of different settings. So phrasing and dynamics. The silly phrase, you would rename this, I think, for older students, but I think a lot of students don't think about the fact that they are choosing how the notes sound. They're choosing the emphasis that they're putting on each note, just like you choose emphasis that you speak. And just mentally playing through a phrase and deciding how you want to play it can be helpful. And then trying to think of a way to play it that would be ridiculous, with the accents in the wrong spot. And hearing the difference and being able to perform that difference will result in some really interesting experiments from your students. Another thing to do is to listen to contrast of dynamics. What is the loudest that a student can play their instrument with still having good tone, good sound? How does the room sound when you're playing loudly? How does the instrument sound when you're playing softly? And can that soft sound still be heard in all of the parts of the room? That brings us to, I hope that kind of clarifies the different ideas of games and how you can use them to get students to do a particular passage many, many times, kind of going beyond just what finger do I put down, what notes am I going to play. And all of those, the main focus was, what are you hearing? In the next section, we're going to be doing a similar thing. I'm going to show you guys similar games, but instead of being based on what a student is hearing, it's based on what they feel or what they're doing when they play. So this is a natural fit for posture. And it's the first game is very appealing for people who are very active. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to find a good position for the instrument. What is the best way to hold that instrument? And then you're going to have a series of, you can have a leader who does this, but you might have a series of cues, but you're going to have the students stand up very quickly and then try to find that good posture again. And then every time that you stand up subsequently, you can do a new pose. So standing on one foot and then sitting and finding your posture. Maybe high-fiving your neighbor, not during coronavirus times, and then finding a good posture. Waving at somebody, sit and find the posture. Just over and over again, reinforcing that good posture from the beginning. And if you assign a cue to this game, such as like hand on your head or anything like that, then you can, as you're rehearsing your group, if you see a bunch of people who lost their posture, you can do that nonverbal cue. They'll all stand up and find their seat again, and then you can continue on with your rehearsal with very little fuss about posture. One of my favorite games is actually balancing stuff on your head while playing. This can be really fun for everybody of all ages. It's kind of a silly thing to do, and it gets a lot of laughter. And I find that a lot of times if your head is not balanced, your posture is usually not very good either. Either you're hunching or you have a lot of tension and you're moving too much in your head. Then the final one kind of is really good for the end of the year or the beginning of the year if you have little things that need to be done around your room. Herculean Task. Basically, make a list of 7 tasks that they need to complete. And in between each task, they have to demonstrate good posture. And it can be things like erasing the board or throwing away one piece of trash or anything like that. And it may sound a little bit childish, I guess. But I found that even high school students really get a kick out of this game. Who can finish it the fastest and who can have the best posture as they're sitting. For intonation, I think people who are really kinesthetic sometimes have difficulty hearing, slowing down and hearing the pitch. So this first game basically starts to introduce the idea of high and low. And often on our instruments, a high pitch doesn't necessarily mean that you're moving your body this way. On the cello, a higher pitch, you actually move your hand down. So kind of clarifying what does it mean when we say a pitch is high and actually showing it physically. So singing pitches and physically demonstrating where they are. And then also demonstrating a glissando, having students mirror the sound of their body. Actually demonstrating something that is out of tune and showing them that it's high and low. And then this is kind of a corollary to the auditory version where you're hearing the sound waves crashing below. So in Feel the Beats, you're actually going to move your hand. So as the pitch gets closer and closer to being in tune, the beats get closer and closer together until it's purely in tune. And one thing that's kind of interesting is when the sound is sharp, the sound waves move really, really, really fast and get small and large. And then when the sound is flat, the sound waves move slower, but get smaller and larger. So that can help them as well. For teaching rhythm kinesthetically, rhythm and articulation, body percussion is probably the easiest way to do this. And it's a very common technique. One thing that you may not have thought of is to use different parts of your body and assign them to different rhythms and to point out the different kind of sound that they're making, like a lower sound or a deeper sound, a sharper sound, clear sound, and kind of tying that back into the listening for articulation. You're not just moving around, you're hearing what you're actually doing. So found percussion is a pretty fun way of doing things. Basically, you'll have different stations in your room and a particular rhythmic example that you are trying to reinforce with your students. And they'll go to each station and have to look around and find something to perform the rhythm on. So that can be really fun for teaching kind of a difficult rhythm, a syncopation, or a dotted rhythm. And then musical charades. So this is similar to the idea of when you clap this rhythm, everybody knows what song that is. So you can allow students to clap the rhythm, or you can say they have to actually dance the rhythm. I think that's up to you. And it could be a rhythm from a song that you're working on, and the other students have to guess that rhythm that the leader is trying to show. It could be a rhythm that you're teaching them, such as a dotted quarter note or a more advanced syncopation. Just anything to get them to hear that rhythm over and over again. For tone, I think relating this back to kind of feeling a texture, and we talk a lot about texture in music. So one idea that requires some props is actually putting some items into brown paper bags, things that are soft or scratchy, and have students try to demonstrate the sound of that object. And I think some students and some individuals might not be that excited sticking their hand in like a bag to feel an object. And so you can have them pull out the object and just demonstrate that sound. But the point would be that they would feel something soft and like a cloth and try and play that. Feeling the sandpaper, trying to play that sound. And then also feeling the vibrations. How does your instrument actually vibrate when you're playing softly? How does the instrument actually vibrate when you crack a pitch? How does that actually move? For phrasing and dynamics, again, acting out and just moving physically, trying to identify like the storyline or the arch of a particular phrase, and then actually playing that on your instrument. Also, the idea of sound as a wave. So sound waves move how we make them move when we play. And so on string instruments anyway, if your motions are small, the sound will be less. If your motions are big, the sound will generally be more. And so trying to connect the actual motion of what you're doing to create a dynamic or create a phrase and how that affects the motion of the sound waves can be really effective for students who struggle to hear different dynamic nuances. Okay, imagination is a really fun tool, and it works, I think, for everyone really, and especially in high school, students I find aren't asked to play creatively or use their imagination as much in their normal classes. So this is a great kind of refreshing experience for them. So for posture, trying to imagine playing your instrument as different characters. You can use TV characters. What would Mickey Mouse, how would Mickey Mouse play the cello or the violin? Can you play like them? And if you choose TV as your character that they're going to be, then it's important that you know what TV shows your students watch, because they might just pick characters that are silly. And you need to know some characters that would actually play properly, that they can imagine. You can use public figures. How would the Queen of England play? How would the president play? How would the governor play? How would the principal of the school play if they were playing the instrument? The other thing you can think about is things in nature. So imagining that you're a tree and playing. Imagining the breeze in the tree while you play. Being rooted. All of these images can be really helpful for students. For intonation, audiating the sound. Can they actually hear what they're trying to produce? When they play, can they tell if it matches what they wanted to play in the first place? Hearing the sound waves and showing them actually what the sound looks like. And then also coloring, using coloring to identify shades of a note. So if you're playing a chord and you want the third to be lower, what shade would that be? And actually coloring, shading in that on their music, or kind of drawing a map on a piece of paper of the intonation that you're looking for. And this is just a picture. There's several videos of what the sound waves look like when they're actually played. And this can be inspiring for students to kind of try and create that picture with their tone. For rhythm and articulation, the idea of kind of creating a secret code to count the rhythm out and teaching that to one another. If you assign different words, trying to make a whole sentence and communicating that across the classroom or to a partner. Using the idea of a story or a journey to kind of construct how you want a phrase to go. If it's going to be, oh, I'm sorry, that's the phrasing one. Using a story and traveling and kind of hearing, is it bumpy? Is it smooth? How do they get each different sound and part of the journey? You can try it on a scale. You can try it inside the actual phrase itself. And then kind of trying to copy animal sounds, different chirps of birds and whatnot. And then using letters to describe the sound of articulation. For tone, actually imagining different scenarios. Like pretend that you are getting ready to open Christmas presents and play this song. And this actually works quite well to harness student imagination. And it changes the tone quite a bit. My theory is that physiologically, when you're imagining something, an experience that clearly, it changes a little bit how you move your body and then therefore the sound that comes out. And then also playing the song for some individuals. So for phrasing and dynamics, imagining playing on a landmark in a very huge space and trying to send your sound out. And then also playing as different animals. Trying to determine which one is louder, which one is softer. And students will do this frequently. So I think that we're almost out of time. So rather than going on to this next slide, what I can do is share this slideshow link with you guys, so you have access to this last slide. And I'm interested if anybody has any questions or comments.
Hey there, Molly.
Hey.
Everybody has been thrilled. They love the alarm. Katie says she loves the alarm, that her sixth graders are going to get a kick out of that. Mm-hmm. And there have been some questions about links to the slides, which is that what you're going to put in the chat?
I'm going to put it up on the files to share, I think. Let's see. I'll put it in this where I think you can download it, and then in the chat, I'll put a link. It's just on Google Drive. So
okay.
Let me get the sharing link here.
And then just a lot of love for you. They tell you that they think the ideas are great. And Katie says loves all the ideas. So popular.
Awesome. So yeah, these are things that I've just learned through my years of teaching and observing other teachers. And actually, a good resource for this is if you Google Suzuki group games, and these are designed for getting students to do a lot of repetitions, because that's a main cornerstone of Suzuki learning is, do it 100 times, which, I don't know if everybody really has time for that, but 10 is nice. So it can be really fun. So just one quick thing that I wanted to share with you guys before we end, very end of this, is kind of what I do if I get stuck. And I think one of the things that I'm always considering is that the students signed up to be in our classes or lessons. And if they're not really responding to anything, there's probably something wrong. Either they're not speaking our language, or there's something outside of the class. And as difficult as it is, it's our job to kind of keep them involved and try and help them. And in a last-ditch effort where they're just all lost, you can ask students what they want to work on. And I don't have time to play the video, but I had a student who was very willful and didn't want to do anything, and it happened to be a Zoom lesson at her house. And she came up with this game. She went and got like 5 random items from her house, and she was like, how can we use these in our lesson? And I just had to on the fly kind of come up with things. And it was a little rubber band bracelet, a pencil, a book, a cup, and I can't remember what the others. But it turned out to be a really fun game, and I couldn't think of everything. And so she came up with ways to use them to practice what we needed to practice. So it can be done. All right, well, I think if nobody else has any questions, I think that concludes my presentation. I'm sorry I didn't get through all the slides for you guys, but they're shared for you.
Thank you so much, Molly. There's thunderous applause.
Oh, bye-bye. Bye.